Happy Friday, everyone, and back with you on Bears All Access on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. It's brought to you by IGS Energy. I'm Jeff Joniak, along with Super Bowl winning Bear Tom Thayer, and our weekly guest, former Bears quarterback Jim Miller from SiriusXM NFL Radio's Moving the Chains. Thanks, as always, to our producer, Jordan Tredup, and the folks here at The Score for their assistance. Coming up in moments, we visit with our good friend, the Pro Football Hall of Fame writer, Dan Pompei from The Athletic, to talk about the Bears and other interesting NFL stories. Tom and Jim, good to be with you. We've been off for a while, but I'm on vacation. You guys shamed me into giving up an hour of my vacation, so here I am. I hope I don't let you down, Jim.
Oh, you never let us down, Jeff. I mean, come on, that's the way you show up for your team. You're a good teammate, Jeff. Way to go.
Tom, as an offensive lineman, you appreciate good teamwork. So
I do. I'm glad to see you here. Jim and I have had daily calls, just making sure that we are on the same page, getting ready to go into our 40th NFL training camp together, and making sure that if in fact that you did back out at the last moment, Jim and I were prepared to carry the hour.
That's what I certainly would expect from a quarterback and an offensive lineman. All right, so let's start with the latest on the Bears, the trade with New England for veteran receiver, the former first-round pick out of Arizona State, N'Keal Harry. 6'4", 24 years of age, acquired for a seventh-round pick. Tom, this is a potential high reward for a low-risk move, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm all for it. I'm glad that the Bears personnel grouping and scouting department is out there investigating every opportunity to get a position or this football team in a more competitive spot. And when you talk about bringing in a 6'4" receiver, that's what the Bears are looking for right now, someone to complement the size of that position. Obviously, every other scout across the board in the NFL evaluated this guy to have talent, or else he would have never been picked in the first round. So I'm excited to see what he can contribute to this football team. All you got to do is come in with a good attitude, and you got to be ready to run. This is not something that you can introduce yourself to the team and take time getting ready. N'Keal has got to be ready the day he gets here.
Jim, what'd you learn about his stay in New England over 4 years?
Well, I think this is an explosive player. We do an explosion number. It comes in at around 70. This player tested in at like 85. All right, because his 40 time, his broad jump. This is a very explosive player. He's a big player, and obviously he's involved in New England's blocking game and how they get their running game going. But I think for him, it's about confidence. He got hurt early in his rookie season, and it kind of has just dropped off from there. Last year, he requested a trade out of New England, and they were thinking about converting him to a tight end position. So I think a change of scenery is something good for this player. I think for him to come in, learn the offense of the Bears, and try and get some confidence back. But the talent is there. It's definitely there, and I agree with you. It's really a low-risk proposition that the Bears have taken right here.
And he mentioned the run blocking, and I feel that if you're going to play receiver for the Bears moving forward, you're going to have to be willing to be a blocker and dig out some guys along the way, and he definitely has that. I think he's a good run blocker as well. All right, time to say hello to our good friend Dan Pompei, the Pro Football Hall of Fame writer from The Athletic, doing great features on some of the interesting stories in the National Football League. Dan, thanks for taking some time, and we got to hit it right out of the gate. Your feature stories, as you know, I love. They're so in-depth, and they really paint the picture of a person and then the athlete that he is. And you just penned a beauty on Darnell Mooney. You and I have talked about him in the past. Some of the things that I liked about him was his work ethic, and boy, that just blossomed into some great landscape of detail about what you found out about Darnell Mooney. Fill us in a little more on that article. It was published yesterday.
Yeah, he really, as you guys know, he's pretty special in terms of the way he works. And, if work ethic and attitude have anything to do with a player being successful, Darnell Mooney is going to be a star in the league. Of course, he's got, some really unusual ability to move, I think, too, both in terms of, his smoothness and his suddenness. So he's got a lot of things going for him. And I really believe that he's a guy who, now the Bears are putting a lot of stock in him, with letting Allen Robinson go and really not signing another or drafting another receiver who you could really say, well, this guy's going to be a big contributor. So, Darnell Mooney has to really step up and Obviously, he's been working hard trying to develop chemistry with quarterback Justin Fields.
Darnell Mooney, it's kind of, he's never been given the respect that he hopes to earn in the long run. Is this fuel for the fire in the fact that, there's always been a reason to, oh man, this guy is, he can catch the ball, but there's always something about him. Is that incentive to him?
It is, Tom. He is one of those guys who kind of carries a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. He told me that one of the things that he noticed on Twitter was that people were kind of making fun of the Bears for not being very good in the passing game last year. They were ranked 30th in the league. And he took a screenshot of that, and that's his screensaver on his iPad now. Every time he opens up his iPad, he sees that. But, I think that, the bigger issue is that you're talking about a guy who is rated a 2-star recruit coming out of high school and, was not highly recruited. He had one offer from Tulane, and he was their last player that they offered. So he's always been kind of this underdog guy. But, it's never really bothered him. I think it's something he's always kind of embraced. The fact that he's small and people say, oh, he's not big enough to be in the NFL or to be a star in the NFL. I think that's something that gives him fuel as well. I should note, though, that he's bigger now than he used to be. He says he's up to 183 pounds, which, he previously played about 10 pounds lighter than that.
Well, Dan, let me ask you this, because last year, towards the end of the year, the ball started to get more focus his way. Darnell Mooney was getting more opportunities to catch the ball. I thought late in the season, he really came on strong. He has to know that he has the ability to play, but where is the confidence? Here you're talking about that he's got this chip on his shoulder, but he's got to believe that he has the talent to do it, because the Bears offense was kind of going through him towards the end of last season.
Yeah, I do believe he does have the confidence, Jim. I really do. If you talk to him, he talks about he's got really high hopes. I mean, he talks about being a player like Aaron Donald, who just dominates and makes other teams really respect him and kind of focus on him. And I think from that standpoint, he's where you need to be. And he's got every intangible that you could ask for. I think the only thing you could criticize him for, or say, you wish he had more of, you wish he was Harry size, or you wish he was a bigger guy. But certainly there are plenty of receivers who are smaller in the league now. I think if you look back when you guys were playing, if there were smaller receivers, they were strictly slot guys, right? They weren't guys who do everything. Now you've got guys who do everything. They play outside, they play inside. You've got guys like Tyler Lockett. You've got guys like Tyreek Hill. You've got Stephon Diggs. Some of these guys might be a little bit bigger, or a little bit different size than Darnell. But clearly, I think we've seen that the league has a way to use these players very effectively. And I think it'll be interesting to see what Luke Getsy does with Darnell.
This is Bears All Access on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score with Tom Thayer, Jim Miller. I'm Jeff Joniak, and our guest, Dan Pompei from The Athletic. A couple things resonated with me also about that article, and I've done plenty of features with Darnell already, but the fact that you say he dips into the quarterback meetings is significant. There are things he's doing that other players are not in terms of the homework. He's got the hustle, he's got the homework, he's got the humility, and the homework never ends if you want to be great. So he keeps talking about being great. And then the other part of that quarterback room visit is that you underscored this in big, bold letters, is that Mooney and Fields need each other, period. And a lot of this reminds me of how Matt Forte prepared, ironically, both Tulane grads, but just what that means to have a receiver in that quarterback room. Dan, you can talk about that, and Jim can as well, obviously.
Yeah, well, I think they have a chemistry, Fields and Mooney. They really do. And it extends beyond what happens in meeting rooms or in practice or on the field. And, they kind of just, they're drawn to each other. They get along. They hang out with each other. So those things are all good. And I think, obviously, nothing matters, though, unless Fields throws passes that Mooney can catch. And I think, the Bears have seen some of that in the offseason work already, where the two of them are clicking probably to a greater degree than they did last season, now that they're working together more. But their development obviously is key to this team because, Mooney needs Fields, Fields needs Mooney, and the team needs both of them to be stars in order to be anything close to what it wants to be in 2022.
Hey, Jim, did you have guys go into the quarterback room?
Yeah, this is really interesting to me because, I just was down at the Senior Bowl down in Mobile, Alabama to induct all the players that get inducted into the Senior Bowl Hall of Fame. And Kevin Falk was one of those players, running back from LSU, great player in New England Patriots history. I mean, he still leads all running backs in rushing, but any play that, say, on third down where you needed to make a play, he made it every single time. And when he arrived at New England, he got to know Tom Brady really well. He went into the quarterback room. He said, if I know what the quarterback knows, I'm going to be just fine. And what he wanted to focus on, Dan, was the entirety of the play. He not only wanted to know his assignment, he wanted to know what everybody else was responsible for. So he pumped Tom Brady for this information to explain everything. And so he was better prepared for what could ultimately happen on every play and how it unfolded. So I'd be interested to know if that's what Darnell Mooney is doing with Justin Fields, the entirety of the play. And not every player has a great understanding of it. They just focus on their job rather than what their teammates have to do on every single play.
Well, yeah, I think that's definitely a part of it, Jim, and a very good point. I think the other thing is too, the language of how these quarterbacks are speaking and how they're communicating, especially given the fact that it's a new offense. So, there are new words, there are new phrases, there are new play calls and all that. So I think this is more important this year than it probably would be in subsequent years. And Mooney wants to be on the same page, be able to speak the same language, and also know the thought process of Justin Fields and the other quarterbacks, and how they arrive at certain conclusions, and how their mind works in terms of going through progressions and identifying things that they see in coverages and fronts, and even from the standpoint of protections and all the different things that go on in a quarterback's head. I think Mooney wants to understand that so he can be the best player he can be.
Dan Pompei from The Athletic with Tom, Jim, and Jeff. This is Bears All Access. Let's take a break here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. This segment of Bears All Access is brought to you by Athletico Physical Therapy. Visit athletico.com to request an appointment in clinic or virtually and start feeling better tomorrow. With Tom Thayer and Jim Miller, former Chicago Bears, I'm Jeff Joniak. Our guest for another segment here is Dan Pompei from The Athletic, doing some great work on scanning the league for the most interesting stories. We talked in depth about Darnell Mooney. Tom, I know you probably had another question about that before we move into other topics about the Bears of 2022.
So, Dan, you look at Roquan Smith, Jalen Johnson, Eddie Jackson, Justin Fields, Dave Montgomery, Cole Kmet. There's kind of question marks behind every one of these names and what their future is going to have and what impact they will have on the Bears. Why Darnell Mooney?
Well, I think that the Bears are really counting on him to step up, Tom. Obviously, Fields is the other guy they're really counting on to step up, but they've put so much stock into that one player because, again, they let Allen Robinson go. Free agency, they signed some guys who really weren't established starters in Byron Pringle and St. Brown and Pettis. Obviously, they acquired Harry in a trade this week, but they didn't go out and get an established guy. They drafted a guy not with their first pick or their second pick. They drafted him with their third draft pick. So it's really a statement about what they believe in Darnell Mooney. And then you look at what he did last year, what he's done his first 2 years in the league, and kind of the ascension of the player, and where you would naturally expect him to go in his third season, especially if he can establish this relationship with the quarterback. Look at who he's had throwing to him all this time. It's been a kind of a rotating door at the quarterback position, and no one really has been established. So I think the potential for Mooney is pretty great in his third season if he can continue to take the steps that he's taken in his first 2 years.
In terms of Velus Jones Jr., because you brought him up, Dan, I look at Tyreek Hill and how he burst onto the scene there in Kansas City. He wasn't a high pick either. And I think they have hopes for this player, and I think that's what this year is about for the Bears. You kind of really just encompassed about Justin Fields, who's a young player. Here you've got Darnell Mooney, who's still a young player. I think, you look at Jaquan Brisker, he's going to be a young player that a lot is expected of. Kyler Gordon as well. And I think Velus Jones Jr. is kind of one of those guys as well. And that's kind of where I see this season for the Bears. A lot of young players getting opportunities. Yes, they're going to make their share of mistakes, but it's how these players grow throughout the year that is going to solidify this roster.
Yeah, the nice thing about the Bears, Jim, as you alluded to, these players are going to get chances, because if you look at the roster, you don't have a lot of established guys in there who are going to be clogging up player development. So, if these players have the ability, if the coaches have the ability to, kind of bring them along and coach them in the right way and then put them in position to really succeed, I think that's really crucial with a player like Velus Jones, because I think, if you just ask him to do whatever you would ask Darnell Mooney or N'Keal Harry to do, you might be disappointed. You need to have a specific role for him. And if you do, I think he could make contributions as a rookie.
The Athletics' Dan Pompei, our guest here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score with Tom Thayer, Jim Miller. I'm Jeff Joniak. In May, Dan, you wrote about leadership being a principal key for Matt Eberflus in his first year to find those leaders. So we just mentioned a bunch of guys. Tom just rattled off a bunch of guys that are under the age of 25. And I want Jim and Tom to chime in on this too, as former players in those huddles, as veteran players. Can players under age 25 be leaders when you have a brand new system, a brand new coaching staff, and a brand new leadership?
Yeah, why not? I mean, I think, first of all, if a player is a significant contributor, if he's carrying his weight on the field, it starts with that, right? And then if the player is doing everything the right way, if he's the kind of guy who worked the way that Tom did and Jim did, and so all the great Bears of the past, and then thirdly, if he's a guy who is comfortable with kind of bringing others along with him and saying things, that's not always the necessary part of it. The necessary part is the production and doing things the right way. And I don't think it matters how old you are. We've seen young leaders before, and we'll see them again. It's just a matter of stepping up to the plate and doing what you're supposed to do.
It is a great topic to talk about, because when you look at recent Bears history, you look at a couple of guys like Jimbo Covert and Mike Singletary. Young guys, immediate leaders. Jimbo Covert, the youngest captain in Chicago Bear history. Jeff, one of your favorite, Mike Brown. How long did it take him to be not only a vocal leader, a leader by example, and then when they put him on the field to start, communicating with Urlacher, communicating with Briggs, with Peanut Tillman? We do have recent examples of super success of young guys that want to put themselves up front and accept that leadership role.
Well, I think when you look at Mike Brown, him specifically, I agree with Dan. How he just came in and solidified the safety position. It's how he worked, and he went about everything the right way every single day that Dan's talking about. In certain positions, I think like safety, you have to have communication, much like a quarterback, that you're a leader by default. And that'd be my next question to Dan, is when you look at Justin Fields, I always worry about young quarterbacks that are now going into a new offense, have new language, new calls, how things are read, things like that. And it's really how quickly Justin Fields can get on board with what Luke Getsy is doing. And so whether your communications with Darnell Mooney or even with Justin Fields, how quickly is that happening for Justin Fields so that he can own it, where he feels comfortable in an offense? Because I always go back to Ohio State, where he never even called plays in the huddle. He basically turned towards the sideline. The coaches signaled all 11 players, but now Justin Fields, he has to own this. It was part of the reason last year in training camp, Coach Nagy was like, yeah, he's getting better at spitting out plays, but where is he at from that development? Because that comes with leadership too. He has to own that, and that he has to command it where the players now trust him that he is the true leader on the field.
Yeah, good points, Jim. And, I think with Justin, the one thing that everyone tells us is that he works like a leader, right? He works really hard. Whether or not he's at the level where he's able to pull everything together like you're talking about, we're not going to know until he gets out there in camp, and certainly in games. We'll get a little better feel in the practices. We'll get a better feel still in the preseason games. But ultimately, we're not going to know until we get to September and the regular season begins, and he gets out there against live defenses, and he's really challenged. And those are questions he's going to answer every week, all season long, for 17 games, hopefully, assuming he stays healthy and he's out there that whole time. But it's a matter of proving yourself, I think, especially at the quarterback position on a consistent basis.
Dan, you have visited Steve McMichael, the great Chicago Bear defensive tackle, on several occasions in his battle here. You wrote about it in March, also a beautiful piece about a guy that's stubbornly, as he played the game, trying to survive what he is dealing with right now. What has that been like for you as a guy who, obviously covered him as a player and gotten to know him in different ways post-career, but also the players and ex-teammates that have come to visit him, like Tom included?
Well, I think, first of all, Steve has been an inspiration to a lot of people with the way he's been battling this disease, terrible illness. And, you go to see him, and as Tom could tell you, he's smiling and cracking jokes, and he likes to talk as much as he can about the old days and hear what you have to say about, old stories and that kind of thing. So, that part of it has really, it's been touching, I think, for all of us who've seen him and been able to be in that room with him. And, I think obviously, it's sad to see him deteriorate the way he has, but I think, he's handling it as well as you can handle it. So that's a good thing, I think. And it's something that makes you feel good, makes you walk away feeling good.
One thing that's impressed me about everything that Ming is going through is his support staff, his support system, his daughter, his wife, Misty, the players that have gone to support him, and people outside other than just players. And I think it's a reflection ultimately of what Steve McMichael meant to the group of people that do come and visit him. Because when you knew Steve McMichael as Mongo and the way he portrayed himself, he was almost like a character playing football. Ultimately, though, when you get to the foundation of Steve McMichael, he's a super intelligent person, a dedicated teammate, a dedicated, family guy. And so it is inspiring to see the people that have supported him along this horrific journey. And so I think there's so much support for him. And every time they do see a picture of him, it is, you're always concerned for him, but you're also so appreciative of the type of support, Dan, your article, and everybody else has been able to give him. And I know recently there is a picture of he and Dan Hampton on the social media, and it's sad to see, but it's also inspiring to see that the way Steve still supports people and people are supporting him.
Jim, you've studied the game obviously in a different way post-career now as a member of the media, but the Hall of Fame is certainly something that people are talking about right now. He is probably one of the more underrated defensive tackles in NFL history. I think that's a fair statement. What do you think, Jim, and then Dan, about any Hall of Fame chances? Dan's certainly one of the 49 members on the Hall of Fame committee.
Yeah, and Dan and I have had conversations like that, and Dan has a really important role when you really got to represent a player and really stand up and get the other voters on board of getting a player into the Hall of Fame. I mean, it is so difficult to do. You know, you just look at the semifinalist list that just came out. I mean, some of those guys, I look at Dan Reeves or Don Coryell, and some of these guys are just so worthy to get in there, in my opinion. But it's difficult because, as Dan knows, they've got to carry the mantle. They've got to state the case. They've got to list the points of why this player is so deserving to be in a Hall of Fame. And it's a job that I do not envy, because that's a hard position to be put in, that you're the salesman and you got to get all these other people on board to see it your way. And you've got to create the points that will ultimately get a player over the top into the Hall of Fame. So it's a very difficult job. You know, I give Dan and all the voters a lot of credit, because it's a hard job. And like I said, I don't envy being in that position. It's a very coveted position, and they hold a lot of responsibility. But a player, a former coach, a contributor, you know, that's kind of their lifeline and who they're relying on in order to make these things possible.
Well, appreciate that, Jim. You know, I really think I always like to say that players get themselves in the Hall of Fame. And, you know, I really believe that Steve is so worthy. And it's just a pity that we've never even discussed his case. And, you know, if you look at his credentials, they're pretty incredible. You know, you're talking about a guy who, you know, they recently tracked sacks going back to 1960. If you look at every defensive tackle since 1960, primary defensive tackle in sacks, Steve ranked 8th, I believe. And of those ahead of him, only 2 of them are not in the Hall of Fame. One of them's Aaron Donald, who's going to get in there on the red carpet the minute he retires. And the other was Jethro Pugh, who had, I think, 1.5 sacks more than Steve. And then, you know, you look at what he did as a run player. I mean, he led the Bears in tackles 7 times, playing, you know, with some great tacklers, obviously, Hall of Fame, you know, run players. And then you look at his longevity. I mean, I think, you know, he checks so many different boxes. And I really do hope that, you know, the Hall of Fame gives him a good hearing at some point, because he's so deserving. And, you know, he really, he's been overlooked. He was overlooked his whole career, obviously, playing next to Dan, playing next to Richard and Mike Singletary. I think he was perennially overlooked, given the way he came to the team and all that. And he shouldn't be overlooked in retirement.
No better man to plead his case. One of 9 members on the seniors committee as well, Dan Pompei, the Hall of Fame writer from The Athletic. That's going to wrap up our segment. Dan, we appreciate it. We'll see you at training camp.
Okay, thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, coming up next, more with Tom and Jim here on Bears All Access on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. Welcome back to Bears All Access, brought to you by IGS Energy. Choose clean energy for your home at IGS.com, because every good choice adds up to a better world. With Tom Thayer, Jeff Joniak, and our weekly guest, former Bears quarterback Jim Miller from SiriusXM's NFL Radio's Moving the Chains. Good to have you guys along. Great conversation with Dan Pompei. It sparked other things in my head, fellas, as we look at the Bears, specifically at the receiver position, with the addition, obviously, of all these different types of receivers that have been brought in by Ryan Poles, from Byron Pringle to Equimania St. Brown to Dante Pettis to Velus Jones Jr. to Tajay Sharp, and now N'Keal Harry, plus some guys that have been here. I keep thinking about Daz Newsome as a guy that's could be a surprise during camp. But obviously the Bears have been criticized by many about the process of building around Justin Fields. But at the same time, Tom, I don't want to trade first round picks right now to get somebody else. You know, they always mention DK Metcalf, or if Deebo Samuel will be out there. Yeah, they would be great pieces, but you know, that financial commitment and the picks, I mean, I don't mind this process until we find out exactly where the Bears are going to be in this scheme moving forward with their quarterback, Justin Fields.
Right. Jeff, that's the key phrase there. You got to figure out how the production and the process and the development of Justin Fields is going. Listen, this is not a fantasy draft league that we're sitting here saying, oh, I want this guy, I want this guy. And you don't have to take everything else into consideration about the finances of the years of service and production. So I like the process of what they brought along. And if any of these guys, from Harry to St. Brown to Daz Newsome, as you mentioned, and all the other guys, if they're going to come out here and they're going to show their true competitiveness, it's going to be evident. And when we just got done talking to Dan Pompei, I'm glad they have a guy like Darnell Mooney who has such a serious approach to his job, because it's sometimes, Jim, you know this, you got to have receivers that put pressure on the quarterback to be better, to make sure they're in the classroom, understanding what they're saying in the huddle. And if you can have that second level of intelligence inside the huddle with the quarterback, it's not necessarily making corrections, but making sure what the receiver is hearing is understood by everybody. And so I'm excited to see what's going to happen going forward. I'm excited to see the competitiveness of training camp. And, you know, whether you're 5'10" or 6'5", you got to be able to be in the exact right position so Justin can identify the best place to go with the football and then get it to the receivers. And then, you know, offensive line, running back, it's a whole different position. But right now it seems to be focusing on what the receiver position can do for the growth of this offense.
I totally agree with that. Bobby Ingram used to challenge me all the time. Bobby was such a very smart football player. He thought like a quarterback at the wide receiver position. And I think that's what Darnell Mooney is trying to do. It's going to motivate Justin Fields. And yes, it's a very competitive room, and it should be. Every position should be competitive for the Bears for what they want to do. And so Mooney seems to be taking the lead right now because he's got a rapport with Justin Fields that's really continued from last year. And now can Justin Fields get that connection with other receivers, whether it's the young Velus Jones, whether it's Byron Pringle that you just mentioned, maybe Daz Newsome from last year who showed some ability in the slot. You've got St. Brown who comes with knowledge of the offense. And really, he's got to get all these players up to snuff and get to know them a lot better, much like he is with Darnell Mooney. You know, as sooner that happens, the better. But I like that it's extremely competitive, because the guys that go out there and make plays, they're going to continue to get opportunities. That's what's going to motivate this group.
Is Daz Newsome the number one punt returner right now for the Bears? And that is a really key ingredient of the way he's portrayed as a receiver. Because if you can really be this effective punt returner, because it seems to be more important than kickoff returns because they take a knee so often, and we don't know how that message is going to be delivered here going into this new season. But when you talk about all those other names, you know, Daz kind of left a good taste in our mouth at the end of the season about having some courageous punt returns, even in difficult conditions like out in Seattle.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he will be the punt returner. And that's quickly for young players. That's where they can make their biggest contributions. I will put Daz as a punt returner. I'd let Velus Jones Jr. do the kick returns. Like you said, a lot of those are touchbacks anyway, but that's where he can probably instantly have an impact for the Bears with his size and speed and what he's able to do. How was Tyreek Hill introduced to the Kansas City Chiefs? He was their kick and punt returner. He had 6 touchdowns his rookie year from that standpoint. So I think Daz will have an opportunity there, and I like that thought a lot.
Yeah, interestingly, that a 6th round pick, Daz Newsome, Khalil Herbert was the kick returner last year for the large part, a 6th round pick, and this year's 6th round pick, Treston Ebner, is also going to be a candidate back there as well. Heck, Harry could be a possibility as well in the return game. So that to me is one of the more intriguing competitions, honestly, because unfortunately, as Tom referred to, the muted kick return game is a frustrating element and development in the National Football League for safety concerns. But that punt return thing, ball security, obviously first and foremost, but what it can do for field position will be as important as anything for Justin Fields and the offense this year. And all this talk about the receivers and what the Bears have not brought in, as opposed to what they have brought in, we're not talking enough about what this team theoretically is going to be. And that is a run-first offense that is going to set up the passing game. So you've got the tight end and running back position. I think we feel good about, don't we, Tom?
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, you got to think in terms of first downs. You know, I wish I knew exactly how many first downs the Bears had last year, because when you look at overall what this offense needs to accomplish, it's a time consumption offense that results in plenty of first downs per game to not only complement the freshness of your defense, but the reality of what you have offered to you in the size of Cole Kmet and the rest of the tight ends, the durability and the ferocious style of running by David Montgomery and the running backs, and then the development of Justin's relationships with other receivers outside of Darnell Mooney. So listen, this is not a kick return, take a knee, 75-yard touchdown pass on the first play and then go back to the sideline. It's about this time-consuming offense that you need to get plenty of first downs. And I think that is going to be the template of success in this offense, not unrealistically looking at world-class speed like Tyreek Hill and saying, okay, every single time he's on the field, we're going to let him run a fly route and see if he gets open.
Bears had 119 on the ground, 180 through the air. I don't know what it ranked. I don't have that in front of me, but it was more than the Bears defense allowed by opponents last year, and another 34 by penalty. So wherever it ranked, obviously it didn't result in enough points, Jim. And that's bigger key here is, yep, first downs do lead the points.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you got to move the chains. And bottom line is you got to get down in the red zone and you got to get down to the pay dirt area and you got to cash in. You got to score, whether that's through field goals, whether it's through scoring touchdowns. The Bears need to score more points. So if they are going old school, we'll say with Kari Blasingame as a fullback, and maybe they run more 21 personnel where they're bloody in the nose of the opponent, which is fine and good. But once they get across the 50 and get down into that red zone area, they've got to be able to cash in. They've got to be able to finish these drives with points. And so that's going to be the challenge. It's a new offense. I think that is going to be the style that they go about doing it, but they've got to really ingrain these young players that they've got to finish coming away with points on every single drive. And that way they won't have the failures that they had a season ago.
That's Jim Miller from SiriusXM NFL Radio's Moving the Chains with Tom Thayer. I'm Jeff Joniak. Another break here ahead on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. See your Chicago Bears at Soldier Field on August 9th for the Meyer Bears Family Fest. Tickets just $10. Get yours at chicagobears.com. Always a fun time. I believe that'll be on a Sunday, so should make it a fun, festive environment to see the 2022 Bears. And training camp coming soon. Tom, the most open battles, I would say, across the board, save for the quarterback position and Darnell Mooney at receiver, I guess, and Cole Kmet at tight end, and some players on the defensive side of the ball with Roquan Smith. But what are we looking at the most open battles here? Is it the DBs? Is it tackle? Is it wide receiver? We'll get Jim's view as well. But Tom, lead us off.
To me, I think if you're going to have success within the division, you got to have a solidified group at the defensive back position. I mean, maybe with an asterisk on the offensive tackle position, but when you're talking about Jared Goff and Cousins and Aaron Rodgers and stuff and what they've been able to do against the Bears defense in recent history, if they don't identify a group that they feel strongly about going to throughout a 16-game schedule with, I think you're only playing into the hands of the opponent's offensive coordinator each time. And then when you talk about, you're almost guaranteed where there's going to be a rookie in that lineup. And so you got to be complemented by significant pressure up front from the defensive line. But when you talk about Jalen Johnson and where Eddie Jackson's at in his career, now you got three remaining positions in the defensive backfield that are going to be battled for from the start of OTAs through the veteran minicamp now into full pad training camp. And I think, Jeff, as much as we stand over there and watch one-on-ones with the offensive line every day at training camp, we might have to sit over there near 7-on-7 and watch the way the defensive backs handle themselves and the coaches try to configure the best plan of attack going forward. So to me, defensive back is my biggest concern at the start of training camp in terms of overhauling a position.
Yeah, it is going to be competitive over there. See how Kyler Gordon, how he can insert himself if he can earn a starting role and they trust him to do it. We like Jalen Johnson on the opposite side and what he'll do. And then can Thomas Graham, can he be the nickel they think he can be. So that's going to be competitive. And a lot of that's going to be determined by the receivers on the offensive side. Like when you are doing 7-on-7, who's going to be the third receiver from the Bears? You know, whether it's Darnell Mooney, who we think is the one, is it going to be Byron Pringle as the 2? Is Velus Jones? Can he come in and battle to be the third wide receiver if, say, they do go 3 wides in certain situations? And then see how N'Keal Harry and all these other players like St. Brown fill in. Because a lot of times that does become a huge personnel grouping. Sometimes nickel defense becomes your base, and it's the same on offense. You got to have true 3 wide receivers that can start. And I think it's a very competitive room at the end of the day and how it's going to unfold.
You know, I want to say one snippet about Velus Jones, because there's been a lot of criticism in the last couple of weeks about him being a 25-year-old rookie. And I think that's a real asset. So one of my roommates at Notre Dame his senior year was Larry Moriarty. He was a 25-year-old graduate of Notre Dame. He was drafted in the 5th round as a fullback to the Houston Oilers and started his rookie year for Earl Campbell. He was so much more mature than the rest of us that were graduating, that were being drafted. He was a type of guy that already had a lot of self-confidence. And even though he was drafted in the 5th round, and he was the only 5th round holdout in the history of the draft, was able to go out there and earn a starting position. So I don't look at this 25-year-old rookie as being, you know, having that as a concern. I think it's going to benefit him in the long run because of his maturity.
Tom and Jim, I agree with that because number one, the criticism is rooted in the idea that, okay, he's already 25, so you've lost theoretically 3 or 4 years of development at the NFL level, but you're not worried about tomorrow. You're worried about today and what he's going to become. So, hey, receivers can play 10 years in the league at age 25, and you'll be quite happy if he's a star player and a perennial Pro Bowler. I'm not saying that is guaranteed, but Jim, I mean, we cover the draft, and yes, I notate those things that it's an older prospect, but is it as big a criticism as we make it sometimes?
No, I don't think it is. Not for the situation the Bears are in. They wanted to draft a mature player. I think that was probably discussed when they selected him, that this is a player that they can count on and trust, like Tom said, because he's more mature. He can come in and compete right away and probably will, you know, service all those opportunities that he has. And I think he'll handle it just fine. And, you know, again, it's a very competitive situation. And for him, he's going to go about his business being an older player to prepare himself to get on the field a lot quicker. He'll learn all the things he needs to do in terms of the offense. He's just has a more mature work ethic about going about his business to do it. So there's a reason why he got held back in college and spent the 6 years that he did in order to prepare himself for this situation that he's in. So I think, like Tom said, it'll help him in the long run.
You know, Jim, I don't know where you were in your career, but I remember when the Bears drafted Curtis Conway, and I was up at Platteville, and I was talking to him, and I was talking to a really homesick young kid who it really affected his performance. So when I think of Velus Jones, here's a guy that's already overcome that. Now, Curtis is a great kid, and I really loved him, but I remember that really kind of holding him back initially.
Agreed. You know, that could have been the situation with like N'Keal Harry. You know, here he plays at Ohio State, gets drafted all the way across the country to the New England Patriots. He got hurt in training camp, which really stunted his growth. And then it kind of snowballed from there for him. I played with a lot of guys that were homesick like that. Some of these guys, it's the first time they've ever been away from home, right, other than their college that they're at. They're in a new city, they're in a new environment, and it doesn't click right away. They're still growing in so many ways away from football and just about the game of life. And so I think he'll be more than well prepared for it when you look at Velus Jones, just in everything that I've read about him, his conversations, how he represents himself. I think he's a mentally strong individual that is going to be prepared for the task at hand.
One more segment to go on tonight's show. This is Bears All Access here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. It's brought to you by IGS with Tom Thayer, Jim Miller. I'm Jeff Joniak, back in a few. This segment of Bears All Access is brought to you by CDW. People to get it with Tom Thayer and Jim Miller from SiriusXM NFL Radio's Moving the Chains. I'm Jeff Joniak. Just a few minutes to go. Guys, So these are some quick topics, as we are apt to do when we run out of time on this show. The acquisition of N'Keal Harry this week will not be the last transaction that Ryan Poles pulls off between now and the start of the season opener against San Francisco. Tom, Jim, I expect a lot of movement still. If a player gets cut from somewhere else, or if a player becomes a trade partner, if that's going to improve the Bears long term, they're going to make these moves. I expect a lot of this. Jim, do you?
Yeah, absolutely. Pat and I are going through an exercise right now. We go through every position to see where every team has their strength, or maybe they've got a player to give, so to speak, whether it's edge rushers and things of that nature. And there are teams out there that have an excess of players to give. Go look at the Houston Texans. They may not have a double-digit sacker, but they've got guys in the 8 and 9 sack range per year, and they've probably got a player or two to give. So that's probably what Ryan Poles in the Bears scouting staff are doing right now. Where are teams where they have excess that maybe we could tap into, that they could be releasing a player that maybe we could pounce to make the Chicago Bears better? I think you're doing your due diligence if you do that. And I'm with you, Jeff. I think there are going to be plenty of moves, not only during training camp, but throughout the entire season.
Tom, at training camp a few years ago, many years ago, I say, there were players being worked out while the team was practicing. And I'm looking at the sidelines and seeing guys wondering what positions these guys might be playing. And it put it in their head that, geez, I may be here right now, but I don't know if I can stay here, because they could be bringing in somebody else to do my job. Even at one point, somebody pulled somebody off the field in the middle of a practice and he was released. What do you think this will do with this kind of mindset going into training camp?
Every player should be aware of their ability to earn a position on the team. And like Coach Stanfield said, as long as your arrow's pointed up, you'll be coached. As soon as I see your arrow pointed down, I'm going to look to replace you. But think about Ryan Poles and his whole staff. Think about this entire coaching staff. Every time there's a player cut from the team that they came from or the team they've been scouting for, they're going to give me a quick evaluation on this player. Does anybody stand out in this group of cuts that maybe could come in here and help our football team?
All right. And lastly, condolences to the family of former Bears punter and tight end Bob Parsons. Passed away last Friday at the age of 72. Larry Mayer for the Bears, Chicago.com, wrote about it. Former USFL guy, Tom.
Right. Birmingham Stallions. I met him on the field before a Birmingham Stallions game. Never met him as a Chicago Bear. Heard a lot about him and watched a lot of his games. But, that was my one time to meet him.
5th round punter out of Penn State, led the NFL in punts and punt yardage in 81 and 82.
And a tight end.
Yes, that's correct. And a tight end. Played his entire 12-year career with the Bears. All right, fellas, that's going to wrap us up. Thanks very much, Jim Miller from SiriusXM NFL Radio. For Tom Thayer, I'm Jeff Joniak. Thanks to Dan Pompei of The Athletic and Jordan Tredup, our producer, and the folks here at The Score. This has been Bears All Access on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. Good night, everybody.